2, 1. And we're live. And welcome everyone to the live stream show. Today, I've got a special guest. Her name is Whitney Lauritsen. And the question that I have for you as we get started today is, what if you were able to really, truly loosen up and get out of your own way and even go as far as to thumb your nose at your comfort zone? And so that you actually felt ready to start showing up for the people who you want to show up and be able to share that thing that you have that would serve other people really well, that creative genius that you all have inside of you. What would that be like? And today's guest, Whitney Lauritsen, I invited her on because she may just be able to help you get there. She's the co-host of a podcast that's called This Might Get Uncomfortable. And she also has been a video host of a YouTube channel called the let's see, what is it? I have to read it here. It's I'm just looking at the thing. Oh, here it is. Ego Vegan Gal. So she's all about great diet, great nutrition, great health. And this channel has grown to 60,000 subscribers. And in the process, she has been the author of not one, not two, but 3 books on vegan cuisine. So as I open the show, I want you to be thinking about what are you doing to step outside your comfort zone? So let's get on with today's show. Oh no, I'm pushing the button, but there we go. Recorded live in Boston, Massachusetts, this is the Livestream Show. In a world full of underexposed entrepreneurs, the Livestream Show is your gateway to a global community of livestream pioneers who dare to go live and create something special and unexpected, which could only happen because it was live. I'm your host, Brad Powell. Let's get on with the show. All right, and we're back. And let me bring Whitney on. Welcome to the show, Whitney.
Hi. Wow, I watched one of your shows before, but somehow I missed the intro. And it was so delightful to see it because I grew up in Massachusetts and went to school in Boston.
Oh, I didn't know that
until I saw the intro that you were in Boston. So that's
right.
Really cool. Is it snowing there? Or really cold, right?
It's close. It's really close. It could snow. I mean, it's cold enough to where it snowed just a couple days ago, believe it or not.
That's what I heard. Yeah.
Yeah. Today, it's just hovering at freezing.
Wow. Talk about uncomfortable. Versus,
yeah, I know, right?
In LA, we had a couple really warm days in the past week. But it's interesting is a lot of people comment on how nice it is to live in California, Southern California specifically. And it is. I really enjoy living here, but I get so excited when there are gray days. And today there's a little bit of grayness in the sky, and I'm always crossing my fingers for rain because I don't miss the snow, but I miss just that chilly, moody day. And we don't get very many of those in Southern California. And
right.
I wonder if there's a place where you can live where it's the perfect balance with all the temperatures. And I guess Southern California comes pretty close.
Well, I've been told, although I haven't actually been there to experience it, but if you move to South America and then go up into the mountains, like in Chile, I don't know what, 10,000 feet in the mountains there the weather is perfect.
Wow. Well, that's a good reason to go there.
It's got the clear skies, the sunny weather, and you actually have seasons, but it's never terribly cold. So
good to know. I'm adding that to my list.
That's where we could go, and you'd be comfortable all year round.
Yeah.
So I'm curious. I mean, when did you leave Boston? When did you move from Boston to LA?
2004, I believe. I think it was the end of 2004 that I moved to Los Angeles.
So it's been a while.
It has, and time flies. I go back usually once a year, so I very much look forward to spending that time. I try to spend bare minimum 2 weeks, but the last time I was there, I think it was about 2 months. I drove out there cross country, and I
Wow.
plan to do that again this year because I love exploring. Speaking of travel, I love exploring the country. And one of the things that I've built for myself over the years is the flexibility to work anywhere. So I can just go in my car and bring my laptop and travel and stay with my family and podcast at my parents' house. And I've made it all work. So I'm
That's great.
hoping to do that again this year.
That's great. Okay, well, and when you do plan, like I know like the world is starting to open up. It will be opening up. People will be doing outdoor barbecues on July 4th this summer. When you do come out to the East Coast next time, let me know, and we
can do a live video in person.
We can go live in person. Imagine that.
Yeah, exactly.
So right now, like you wear a number of hats. Your career has been evolving. The things that you're doing. And I just like when you answer the question and somebody says, well, what are you doing? Like, what do you do now? How do you describe what you're up to? Because I know that it's shifting and you actually are looking at a few different things.
I am, and I have not enjoyed that question for a very long time because it constantly changes. And that's something I've become more comfortable with, being uncomfortable in those moments. I usually, when somebody asks like, tell me more about yourself, I say, well, what would you like to know? Because there's a lot of different angles I can come at this with. Right now, I either lead with social media advisor or well-being coach, depending on the person who's asking or the situation I'm in. Sometimes I'll use the term content creator. Sometimes I use podcast host. It really depends on a lot. But right now, my two big terms that I use are well-being coach and social media advisor, because that's where people typically look to me to speak on something or get advice or hire me.
Okay, so from that realm, these two worlds that you're doing, I mean, one fits the other in the sense that if you're helping people be healthy in their business, a huge piece of being healthy in their business is just being plain healthy. Right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Super helpful.
And I'm a bigger advocate these days for the term well-being because I feel like health can mean so many different things to different people. And wellness has transformed a lot over the years, and some people are not big fans of the word wellness. It's become a very trendy thing, similar to like the word vegan has gone through transformation. It still means the same thing, but it can mean things to different people. And I really love the term well-being, and I hope that word kind of holds its authenticity, I suppose, and doesn't become hyperused, but I think it's going to. So I'll probably end up shifting away from well-being coach at some point. But I really like that term because it encompasses mental, emotional, physical health, wellness, all of that. It's like a holistic approach, which has really been at the core of my work, especially since I started with my brand Eco Vegan Gal many years ago. I was looking at veganism from an eco perspective and eco living from a vegan perspective. And I was looking at health and wellness from all these different angles and not just one. And I feel like a lot of people focus on one thing at a time, which can be great because when you're kind of niche down, as they say, you get to gather a lot of information, but sometimes that keeps your blinders on and you become so focused on this one thing that you become very biased. And another thing I've been working on, especially over the past year, is examining my biases, because I think that leads to a lot of tension, a lack of unity. And I guess my hope is that more people have unified experiences together and more compassion for one another.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're definitely in a moment, maybe even a moment in history, where it seems like it's starting to feel like the world is opening up in that way. People are becoming much more conscious around the concept of having empathy and the concept of, especially now that we've all been social isolation, the concept of how important community actually is.
Yes.
And being engaged, like here we are doing a live stream. I mean, the importance of doing something live in the moment where people, can interact with us. And I see you guys out there. There's a few of you who are watching right now. And if you're here, say something in the comments so that we know you're here. And anything you, like if you have a light bulb go off, put light bulb, say hashtag light bulb, and say what that is. Or anything else you'd like to say, because we have time to interact. That's the whole idea. So in the work that you're up to, like there's this whole thing of, the wellness, like the whole wellness thing. Now, I know, because the way that I actually came across you was in an interview where you were actually talking primarily of your whole social media, digital marketing side of your work, and which is really important from the point of if people want to have a well-run business, if they want to have well-being in their financial world, and they're trying to make it as a business, this is a critical phase. And the issue, and this is what you were talking about and what I want to explore a little bit further, is that we, all of us, and I'll raise my hand and say I've been there too, there's a real sense of overwhelm when it comes to anything to do with online marketing. Every other day, it seems like there's another opportunity to get on board and yet another thing. If it's, like, let's say, just mention Clubhouse. Clubhouse is sort of the new kid on the block. It's wonderful in some ways, but it's a huge, also big, giant rabbit hole in another way of all-consuming, or potentially all-consuming. And even more recently, I just heard Facebook is now doing their own version. So it's going to be like, and they're just one, like Twitter is doing their own version, and they're one of two. Like, I'm sure there are going to be more iterations of this kind of thing. So as a poor, mere mortal, solopreneur who's going, oh no, how do I deal with all of this? Like, how I thought I was doing well on Instagram, but now I've got, 5 other things to pay attention to. I mean, how do you help people who are running around pulling their hair out going, oh no, this is terrible, I want to just shut it down and do nothing?
Well, first of all, that's the common experience. This is what I hear. This is why people hire me to coach them or even manage or direct their whole social media platforms, is because they get very overwhelmed by this. And I've developed a very Zen-like perspective on social media because, first of all, I've been on social media for a long time and doing digital content for a long time. I actually dug up some archives of mine. I was blogging back in 2003 and I completely forgot because it hasn't been something I've been actively working on. But when I was studying film school, I was blogging about it. I was blogging about moving to Los Angeles. I was blogging about just like the whole experience. And that's just been something I've watched evolve over time. Back in 2003, blogging was not a very big deal. And then we saw the rise of bloggers and they were taken very seriously. And then I started to see social media come up in about 2009, and I've been studying it ever since. So first of all, I want to say that it's been a short amount of time and a long amount of time. And so meaning short is things are rapidly changing. You mentioned Clubhouse. Clubhouse came out about a year ago in, I think it was April 2020, but it didn't really start to take off until just a few months ago. So a lot's happened in that short window of a year, or you could say in a short window of 4 or 5 months since it started to get exposure. And it's important to have the perspective that it's new and it's going to evolve and we don't know where it's going to go yet. So a lot of people want to jump on board and try things out, such as myself. I'm an early adopter when it comes to a lot of technology. And that's also my natural tendency. And I'm drawn into that. And not everybody feels that way. I don't get overwhelmed when it comes to something like that. And I guess that's like a little strength that I have, is that I can just go in and try something. But I've found most people are not. In fact, if you've ever looked at the curve of early adoption, most people are not early adopters. They're in like, I always forget what the names of the different path that you can be on, but there's like late adopters, and there's people that want to wait and see what other people are doing. And I think that's where we're getting to right now. So it's important to understand kind of the patterns that we see with not only new platforms like Clubhouse, but new developments, as you mentioned, with Facebook. Facebook has been around. It's one of the first main social media platforms that still exists, if given that MySpace kind of phased out. But Facebook has really hung around, and they continue to experiment and offer new things. And oftentimes when they do, people feel overwhelmed, as you mentioned, about it because it's new. I would say 2 pieces of advice. One, if you can move through some of the overwhelm and see the benefits of joining a new platform or using a new service on something like Facebook, the huge benefit is exposure. The algorithms tend to reward you for using new features. And so I would say, if it helps you cognitively to say, okay, I feel overwhelmed, but there's a huge benefit for me, so I'm going to just push through it and allow myself to be uncomfortable with this overwhelm. But the other side of it is that there's really no rush to any of this. And this is where my passion really starts to come through, and this has been growing a lot recently. Social media, unfortunately, has caused us to feel a lot of FOMO, fear of missing out. We have fallen into the comparison trap personally and professionally. We get very caught up with the numbers. We get caught up in the fear that we're going to be behind. And I've noticed after all these years of doing my work, there really isn't such thing as being behind, because they're always changing. So you might feel behind on a platform like Facebook, but Clubhouse could come out and you could say, all right, I'm going to focus on Clubhouse, and Clubhouse could become so much more important for you and your work. So there's always a new platform. There's always a new feature. There's always an algorithm change. And ultimately, it's not nearly as important as we're often conditioned to believe it to be.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting, this thing about being willing to step into something new, which does, on today's topic, require you to get outside of the thing that you're totally used to and or comfortable with. And I'm just wondering, I'm going to share, in a previous life, when I actually lived on the West Coast, I lived on the Northwest, and I was running an outdoor program for Outward Bound. And that work was really, and I used to joke about it, was facilitating discomfort. We would take a group of people, a group of young people who were basically strangers and not happy to be on the program, and we would challenge them daily, and get them into a place where they really definitely felt challenged and were doing things that for them were entirely new. And then we would facilitate the growth that happened during these times of discomfort. And I'll tell you that it worked. The results of those kinds of programs are amazing. It's transformational. And so, number one, I'm just going to share that from the point of view of inspiring people who are tuning in here, that if you do something new, it can be transformational for you on a personal level, in addition to being transformational for your business. And I'm just wondering, how do you connect around being a facilitator of discomfort in the work that you're doing?
I love that term. Wow. Well, one thing that I believe in is being a role model, and a lot of people want to look to somebody just to see how they're doing things and what they're doing, and there's a comfort in that. I think this is the reason that social media does so well and is such a big part of most of our lives, is we're just curious about what other people are doing. And sometimes we're looking for permission. Sometimes we're looking for comparison. But I think if we lean more into saying, it's okay to get uncomfortable, for example. What's an example of somebody who's uncomfortable? I found this a lot when it comes to physical appearance things. That's been a big part of my journey, especially in terms of well-being, was how much I've struggled with things like body image and self-acceptance physically. And I often look to people who either look like me right now for like permission to look the way I am versus get into the comparison trap of looking like somebody else and beating myself up like, oh, I wish I was smaller or whatever else flaw I see within myself. When I see somebody who is not wearing makeup, I feel permission to not wear makeup. I'm not wearing any right now, for example. I used to always put makeup on when I would go on camera because I thought that's what I needed to do. And it feels uncomfortable still to not wear makeup. But when I see someone else not wearing makeup, it's like, oh, I have permission to be uncomfortable. So I think as a facilitator, I notice that if I can step into my discomfort, it doesn't just serve me, it serves others, because through my work, I know other people are watching me in some capacity or another. And I think even on a personal level, you can do this with your friends and family. They're often looking to see what you're doing. And sometimes we think that they're judging, but sometimes they really are just hoping that we're going to do something that gives them permission to do the same thing.
Yeah, I wish that's awesome. And I mean, the thing of being on camera as a woman without makeup, that's a huge deal. And I think, I mean, there's something there, like if there was something to be done, if there's things that to do to help every woman on the planet be okay with, first of all, just simply how they look, like to be self-acceptance and like, I feel great about how I look. And then be willing to be themselves instead of having to put on this thing that's like, okay, well, in order for me to go here, I have to wear this. I have to be like this. And worthy effort. Like, I completely applaud that thing. Like,
I just really translates into social media too, because we get so caught up in all of these shoulds when the reality is there's just no rules. I mean, there really aren't that many rules in general, unless you look at like our government, which is designed to keep some order, right? But when it comes to business, especially online business, there truly aren't rules. And I think a lot of people get caught up thinking that they have to do something a certain way in order to get the results that they want. And that's something I've been rebelling against recently, because I've followed so many rules and I didn't get the results that I want. Or sometimes I got the results that I thought I wanted, but at the cost of myself. And so what I've been working on lately, and this is a huge part of my well-being, is I would rather not lose myself in the process of trying to get some certain measure of success, because I've noticed through my personal experiences, but also in the research that I do on success, for example, people will reach these pinnacles of success either financially or numbers wise. A lot of these kind of external measures that we use, they can reach them but still be very unhappy. So for me, I'm more about the internal measurements. That's what's ultimately most important, and I think will be the most important thing at the end of my life, is how much did I measure myself based on what was important to me instead of what was important to others. And then if you can join those together, that's the ultimate win. Like you were saying, if we can help ourselves and help other people, then it's like you've really made it.
Yeah, to that point, when I was doing some research on you and what you've been doing recently, I saw one or two fairly recent videos that you've made that seem to be a real shift from what you were doing. I mean, these were very personable, very vulnerable seeming videos where you were talking about things like self-image and struggles there. And I'm just wondering, like, when you were working with, I mean, this is a great thing to just, be yourself and to literally let down your hair and put the screen aside and say, this is I'm being real right now. This is for me. But when you translate that kind of thing to the people who you work with, what do you say to folks in terms of this whole thing of like, they're showing up whether they're trying something new or they're doing something that they've been comfortable with for a while online, in terms of establishing their online presence on social media. And how do you, what do you say to them in terms of pushing through the barriers and saying, okay, well, show something of yourself?
That's such a great question. One of my clients right now goes through that a lot, and it's been really fascinating watching him and hearing his perceptions. And I notice this about a lot of my clients, is there's so much mental clutter that has been accumulated in terms of what they believe they should be doing. And I think that's actually a huge detriment, because one of the most common results is that people get so all over the place in their head with all these different beliefs, they can't move forward. And that's what I have been pushing myself to do recently, is if I just have to tune into why do I want to do something? So those YouTube videos you mentioned, they're incredibly uncomfortable for me to post, but I post them as an experiment. And then a lot of people will write me and tell me that they much prefer that than the polished content that I was doing. People enjoy the polished content, but not nearly as much as they enjoy the raw, authentic. And some people won't like the raw, authentic at all, and that's okay. But what makes me feel good, as I was saying, is the raw, authentic, the unedited, the long. I noticed, for example, I'm a long-winded person. And I've tried to put myself in this box of short form content, and sometimes I can achieve that. But a lot of the times what I really want to do is to just express myself for ever long it takes, and however form. That feels so much better than trying to shapeshift into something just because I think it pleases other people. Going back to my point, it's a short-term win, because as soon as you please other people at the cost of yourself, you immediately feel bad about it, and you get caught up in this cycle where you never really feel good. And that's what I've been working through lately with my content, and examining what is the reason behind it, the big why. Why am I doing this is the big question I try to ask myself. And I ask that of my clients too. And I notice a lot of times when you ask them why, you'll see their brains connecting the dots, and the answer tends to be, I don't know. And it's, I don't know, because they've just been going through the motions of what other people have been doing. And it's are we all going through the motions without understanding why? And that's really scary. We're all just kind of copying other people without even understanding why we're doing it. I don't think that leads us in a very good direction.
Yeah, I'm totally with you with the long-windedness. That's me. It's why I probably never do very well on TikTok, even though I like to dance. I'm wondering.
I always say for myself and other people, by the way, is that platforms like TikTok, they just expanded. They now are moving towards 3-minute long content. It used to be 60 seconds.
My gosh, 3 minutes. So, that's great.
Yeah, 3 minutes is quite long, relatively. Right. And you can always do short clips, or you can always do the beginning of your videos, and I've been watching podcasters, for example, since I'm deep in that world. I've been just watching what podcasters are doing, and they just put little clips, and then you can see the rest of the video elsewhere. So it's the best of both worlds. You don't have to make it short total. You can just trim off part of it and share that, just like you would on other social media platforms. So it's kind of like finding the compromises.
Mm-hmm. So I find it useful in just my way of living to have a practice where I'm doing something uncomfortable. For example, one of the things that I really love doing, which has almost nothing to do with work, but I love practicing improv. And I don't mean comedy improv. I just mean going to a workshop, or there's a group here locally in Cambridge that they meet every other week, and we just practice doing improvisational stuff where you're being asked to literally take on a role that's not you and play with that. And the practice is called Interplay. And I do that because every time I do it, I'm being asked to do something that I feel no, I don't really want to do this. and then I go do it anyway. And that practice is just a great sort of exercising of the muscle of being willing to do something that isn't, within my normal thing. Like I might be asked to say, be a pregnant woman, and interplay as that, talk about a lesson in empathy. So I'm just wondering, like, do you have a practice? Do you have things in your life that you incorporate around, okay, here's what I'm doing to push myself?
That's such a great question. I feel like I naturally, that just kind of comes up for me a lot because I notice the discomfort in a lot of work. Like even doing this can feel uncomfortable at times, and your brain will go off in all these directions and wonder like, oh, am I doing this well? Am I speaking articulately? How do I look? Like your brain can just go through all that, and that feels very uncomfortable. So I guess this could count. But it's interesting because there's different levels of discomfort. And what you're describing, that sounds very uncomfortable to me. I don't know if I would put myself in that position unless I was pushed to. I've done work like the improv stuff before, but I wouldn't necessarily lean towards taking a class. Like just thinking about that, I'm like, oh no, I don't want to do that. But at the same time, on a conscious level, I know I can understand the discomfort and I can move through it. And I think that that's something that I practice a lot. Is I've just started to become so comfortable with being uncomfortable in a lot of these scenarios that I can catch myself. And the first question I would ask is, well, why is it uncomfortable? And a lot of the times it's uncomfortable because we have these preconceived notions or we're desperate, like terrified of what other people are going to think of us. In that class setting, we have this fear of embarrassment. But everybody's there and everyone's kind of equal in their embarrassment. So it's like, all right, we're all in this together. Might as well act like a different gender and see what happens. Like I think that's really cool. And I think a lot of us are more in things together than we realize. And going back to what you were saying before, the more that we can see our unity versus how separate we are, the more comfortable we can start to feel. And one platform I absolutely love right now, actually probably my favorite platform for content, is TikTok. And one of the things that works so well on TikTok is that people are willing to share embarrassing elements of themselves. And as I was saying before, that tends to be what resonates, the rawness and the realness, the embarrassing moments. And there's like so much comfort on TikTok embarrassing yourself that now it's no longer quite uncomfortable anymore because people have just gotten used to saying embarrassing things. And what's neat is that as a viewer, you go, oh, I'm not the only one who does that. I'm not the only one who thinks that. And that I'm not the only one starts to remove those feelings of discomfort. I also think it's very important, to your point, to practice being uncomfortable, like you're saying, to intentionally put yourself in some sort of situation. And just hearing that from you makes me wonder, what other opportunities have I been avoiding? Because a lot of times we don't even recognize how uncomfortable we are until we start to examine it. So I'll be reflecting on that. It also reminds me of, there's a great book and a series of videos. And I think there's also a TED talk on this where a man put himself through intentional rejection for at least a month. It was either like 30 days or 100 days, one of those round numbers. And he just put himself constantly in these positions where he thought he would be rejected. And one of the big lessons that he learned was that most of the time he wouldn't be rejected. There's one great story of where he went to a donut shop and asked them to do some crazy thing that he never would have thought they'd say yes to. And the person at the counter said, sure, why not? And they went and made him like this crazy donut. And he shared a YouTube video. I think it went viral. And he was like, wait a second, like what are the things that we're not even asking people to do because we expect them to reject us?
Yeah.
And I think that's usually at the root of why we don't do uncomfortable things. We just think something's going to happen that we're afraid of.
Right. Yeah, I like that. That's so great. Well, we got a comment here from Candace. Let's see, I can bring it on screen.
Oh, good. Thanks, Candace. She was talking about the curve I think it's called the innovation curve. And yes, the laggard
Laggard.
is the opposite, right? And in the middle is I pulled it up too. It's the majority. So it's a really cool curve if you've never looked at this before. I think it's actually really helpful for business. I think the reason that it was created was to just show the customer journey. And a lot of us, I think, give up so soon. So even you can use this curve in your mind. We don't try things long enough to even know if the results will happen. Sometimes we experience one failure or a fraction of a failure. We're like, okay, I'm going to stop. But this curve shows that maybe you just need more time for the majority to catch in, or even the laggards to catch up.
Yeah. Let's see. I'm just trying to switch this. How do I do this? Click that off and click this one on. Just got another one here. I'm having a little technical difficulty, so I'm trying to get this to show. There we go.
Oh, and Candace again. Thank you so much for sharing.
She just did that the other day. I'll read it out loud. She just did that the other day in a Me Too workshop, taking various sides. Pretty awesome.
Yes.
Way to go.
Oh, that is such a great thing to bring up, because a book that I read recently that I absolutely loved is called The Righteous Mind. And it was such an eye-opener for me because it helped me understand from a psychological level why people have different belief systems. And I think the more that we can do to understand people who are different than us and think differently, not just are different in terms of how they appear or who we think they are, but get it into their thought process. After reading that book, I just wondered, wow, how different would our society be if more of us could, to your point, Candace, put ourselves in other people's shoes and really try to understand them instead of rejecting them. Here we are, we have so many fears of rejection, but what if we examine how much we reject other people? And that's something I've been really working on, how much I judge other people, but how much do I make assumptions about them and then even reject them from my life? Like, oh, I don't agree with them, or I don't like them. I don't like what they're doing. Like these things that come up are basically all forms of rejection, simply because we haven't stopped to think it's almost like we want to take sides or create hierarchies. And I think a lot of us believe that our beliefs are superior to others. And that's where that book, The Righteous Mind, kind of shifted my thinking.
Yeah, I'm not going to go too deep on all of this, but you're opening a whole doorway to this thing, and I'm going to bring it to like the social media world. We're living in a time where, because of the algorithms on all these different platforms, we are now co-creating our own little silo, so that we're only seeing and we're only talking to the people who think like us. And we never actually have discourse, public discourse with people who disagree, except for the trolls. And when a troll comes up, we just kick them out, which is, of course, trolling is not really discourse in any case. But unfortunately, like especially in this last year, I think this is really intensified in the time of being socially isolated. We have relied on online intercourse as much as our main vein of communication. And because of the fact that the channels available to us are Facebook and LinkedIn and YouTube, and the algorithms feed us with our self-perpetuated preferences, the things that we have liked, we get more of that. And the things that we don't like, we never see it again. And here we are.
And that's actually good exercise in getting uncomfortable, is what if you log out of your social media account and try to just view a platform without being logged into it? Like, you can do this online with TikTok, for example. I don't think you can do it with Facebook, maybe to an extent. But there are certain platforms where you don't have to be logged in, or you could create an account that is like intentionally opposite of how you typically are. So you intentionally do not like posts that you would normally like posts that you normally wouldn't like, and just see how that completely shifts what you're exposed to. Because you're absolutely right. The confirmation bias that we experience on social media can be incredibly dangerous in the long term, truly, because our thoughts become so limited and our beliefs become so confirmed all the time that we can't even take into consideration somebody else's thought processes or experiences. And I would love to see more open-minded people. So that's what I've been working on.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, well, let's start to wrap up our conversation here. This has been really fantastic. I've got two things to ask you about before I let you go. And one of them is I like to share sort of the knowledge of like creators. And so give me an idea, like you're a podcaster and you're swimming in the world of podcasting. I'm sure that a number of the people who you talk to in your podcast world are other podcasters. Who is someone who you think deserves to be shared? Someone who you admire, who's a podcaster who people would like to listen to.
Oh my gosh, this is, I just changed my mind on who I was going to say, and I want to make sure I say the name of his podcast correctly. His name is Corbett Barr, Barr. He's one of the people that I've been following for many years in the business world. And he was on my podcast. It was one of the best guests that we've had on our show. And he has a show called the Corbett Barr Podcast, which is a collection of all the different shows that he's been on. And he also is known for a big podcast he's been working on for years as one of the co-hosts called Fizzle. Highly recommend it. And I love his website because it is one of the simplest websites. He's kind of like, in some ways, rebelling against all the fancy websites that are out there. You often associate businesses with so many fancy graphics. And if you go to his site, it's just a white screen with black text on it. And that really inspired me when I was doing some design on my website a few years ago. And I have kind of the best of both worlds. I have some graphics on my site and some very simple. But one of the things I love about Corbett is that he examines what he's doing and really asks himself these important questions. And we had him on my show, This Might Get Uncomfortable, to talk about doing basically a whole reset. And he archived or deleted, in some case, a lot of his online content to start fresh. And it was really remarkable to see someone who had created that much work say, I want to re-examine everything and I want to shape the way that I show up in a different way. And that's a lot of what I've been doing too. So I really resonated. He was one of those great examples of, I felt like I got permission. I noticed this about myself and other people. We often are just looking for someone else to give us permission to do what we really want to do.
Yeah, I think that's a really good hat to put on, is being someone who is taking on the role of giving other people permission. That's so great. Yep. Okay, one last thing. You were sharing before we started going live that you are an avid reader. And so same kind of thing, like what's a good read that you've had somewhat recently that's helped to shift your thinking about the way you're doing things or showing up in the world?
Well, I'm glad you're asking this because I already said one of them, but now I feel like I get permission to say two. So the first one, which I read very recently, is The Righteous Mind, which is phenomenal. I feel like I want to read it again already because it's so dense. And the other book that I love so much that I've read, I think 2.5 times now, is called Do Nothing by Celeste Headley. I'm not sure how to pronounce her name, but she was a guest on my show too, and she's coming up in a few weeks. And she's an extraordinary speaker, broadcast journalist, and writer. And she's working on another book. I can't wait to read. Everything that she's written, I think, is remarkable. And Do Nothing made a massive impact on my life because she goes into the history behind our addiction to efficiency and productivity and giving us not just permission, but encouragement to really examine our relationships to always hustling and trying to do so much, and why we often struggle to rest, for example. And I think rest is an incredibly important thing, if not the most important thing for our well-being. In fact, I recently did an audit of my priorities, and rest was number one. I used this system, which is really cool. So if anyone wants a little practical tip, something I tried recently to look at my relationship with priorities and productivity, is you can create a box, and on one side you have what's urgent, and on the other side you have what's important. And at the bottom you have what's not urgent and what's not important. And you can start to compartmentalize the things in your life. And sometimes they're going to overlap, and sometimes they're going to fall neatly in the boxes. And when I did that, rest was number one as most urgent and most important. So now that's my top priority every day.
Yeah, that's great. I had a guest on. His name is Alex Suyung Kim Pong, and he's the author of 2 books. One is called Rest, and the second one, the more recent one, is called Shorter. And his whole thing was talking about how, some of the greatest, most creative people in all of history, people like Beethoven and Tchaikovsky and Charles Darwin, they didn't put in 18-hour days to do the things they did, even though they were super prolific. They worked, do what we would consider work, for maybe 4 or 5 hours a day. And the rest of the time, they would go hang out in the garden. Or they would do much more reflective. They would go into, town and hang with their friends. This is sort of how they lived their lives. And it was just fascinating to learn that, wow, we're not necessarily, even though we feel so modern and so forward thinking, that there's something wrong with this picture, that if we wanted to be, let's say another Beethoven, for example, we're not actually on the path to getting there. We're doing the things, living the way that we do.
I love that you brought that up too. And that's one of the reasons I love the book Do Nothing, because the beginning of it starts off with the history as well, and how it's really only been 100 years or so that we've had this 9-to-5 structure. And when you really examine things like capitalism and how that's impacted all of our thinking around worthiness. And so many of us feel like we're not worthy if we're not working 8 to 10 hours a day minimum.
Yeah.
That actually means that we're lazy. So what you're describing in our modern day is laziness.
Yeah, right.
But in the past, that was genius.
Yeah.
And so it's so important for us to re-examine this. And there's also a whole fascinating relationship to religion, and how certain religions shamed us into feeling lazy, and we've developed these deep fears as a society of being lazy, and that unfortunately, whether it's social media or certain corporations, they kind of prey on that weakness of ours, of they can manipulate us into feeling rewarded or feeling like a failure based on our feelings about productivity. So that's part of being uncomfortable, is unraveling that and stepping away and noticing that my worthiness is not tied to my social media metrics or how much work I do each day or any of these external accomplishments. It's so much more important for me to take care of myself first, and then let the rest of the day unfold.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, well, I think we're done. I think we're going to wrap it up here. I want to thank you profusely for joining today. This has been actually a really interesting, fun conversation. I really appreciate you being here. And let me just make a little visual adjustment. And again, the invitation, when you're in Boston, we actually got to do this again, and maybe for longer, and maybe at an outdoor cafe. That would be awesome.
Sounds great. You can always count on me to go to a cafe. Fun fact is that going to coffee shops is one of my favorite things, and going to natural food cafes is a deep love of mine. So Don't
All
have to
right.
twist my arm.
All right. That sounds great. Well, thanks again so much for joining today.
Thank you so much for having me.
All right. So I have two things to tell you guys. Number one is that if you are wanting to rest and take some time for yourselves and reflection, and you don't want to sit and watch these episodes and watch these videos, this show, the live stream show, is now turned into a audio podcast. And if you go to thelivestreamshow.com, you can find all the episodes. So you can find the episode I had with Alex and talking about his books, Rest and Shorter, and how you too could be like Beethoven. And it's not the 4-hour work week, it's the 4-hour work day. And this is what he has been exploring. And it's a fascinating conversation that we had all about that. And that's all sitting there waiting for you on, Apple and Spotify and all those other places. You can get it on your phone and take it away. So the live stream show is now an audio podcast. Yay! And next week, if you like this format and you actually like to join me and my guests so that we can have interaction and live conversation in real time, next week I'm going live with Paul Martin next Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. And Paul is another videographer. And we are going to, the reason that I brought him on, I actually posted a query on social media. And I said, hey, if you have something that you could talk nonstop for 18 minutes passionately without any notes or any kind of cheating cards, what would that be? And he came back and said, he has this thing that he's doing, which is all about combining neuroscience and video. And how can you make video that is actually controlling where people look and getting their attention in very specific ways? And the whole thing is, this is a science that I hardly know anything about, but I'm super fascinated by. So this is happening next Thursday at 3, so stay tuned for that. And until then, I will see you in the next live stream. So long, everyone.